Good morning. This is Dr. David A. Padgett. This is World Regional Geography, Section 98A, spring semester 2021. I'm going to share my screen here. And let's see, where is the home page? Okay, so today, as usual, I'm going to start off. Oh, I need to start recording. Jeez. All right. Oh, wait. Oh, I am recording. Okay, so we are recording. So today we're going to do the usual housekeeping and then jump into the lecture. Let's see. So on tap, let me go to student view so that there's no confusion. Okay, so due this week, again, are a couple of assignments. Writing assignment 5A is for those of you who are planning to be teachers, and it's pretty straightforward. I've already talked about it. If you have any questions, please ask. The rest of you all who are not planning to be teachers will complete writing assignment 5B. Again, I talked about it at length on Monday. If you have any questions, please let me know. Also, article review 8 is due at 11:30 p.m. on April the 19th. Again, as I said before, my pledge is to have everything graded by close of business on April the 19th or maybe later. So you will have a clear picture of where you are grade-wise prior to finals week. The plan for now is to launch the final exam project on April the 23rd. And so you will have from April the 23rd to April the 29th to complete the final exam project. At least that's the plan. That's what I'm shooting for. So there's not much time left. Not much time left at all. So today, I'm going to work through the remainder of the reading assignment. And so during the last class on Monday, the focus was upon the physical environment of the former nations or the countries that were formerly part of the Soviet Union. And we looked at the physical environment. And so just to review briefly as you prepare for the assignment for this week and for the final exam project, you should make note of the climate regions, and you should also obviously make note of the physical environment associated with this region. So familiarize yourself with the various mountain ranges, the bodies of water, and there are many of them. Of course, you have the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, the various groupings of nations. You have the Slavic nations, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, and Moldova. Then there are the Caucasus countries, which include Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Then there's the Central Asian countries that include Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Kazakhstan. So be aware of all of those. But today we're going to look at the environmental problems in the region. And so if you read through the textbook, you saw that whoops. You saw that the region has some challenges in terms of environmental problems. So we're going to begin looking at section, the natural resources section under environmental problems. So that's where we're going to begin today, is looking at environmental problems. Now, one of the environmental problems I discussed in detail on Monday, and I use it as a segue away from the natural environment. And that environmental problem, of course, was the Aral Sea disaster. And so I talked about the Aral Sea environmental disaster in detail on Monday, as it was related to the relatively dry climates in the Central Asian region, and how that and human misuse of water resources has resulted in the decimation of the Aral Sea. So we started with, that's not the only environmental problem that exists in this region. So we will start off with this map, figure 4.6. And so if you notice on figure 4.6, if you look at the legend, there are many environmental problems throughout this region. So the brown color area symbols represent critically degraded areas. The gray areas symbols represent heavily polluted bodies of water, the Black Sea and Caspian Sea. The gray line symbols represent heavily polluted rivers, and you see the Volga River, the Ural River, almost pretty much every river is heavily polluted, as you can see. Acid rain, you see there are areas that are impacted by acid rain. So first, let me discuss or describe or explain why there is so much pollution in general throughout this region. Well, in order to do that, in part, we have to go back to the first part of our discussion, which focused upon the various demographic and economic properties of these nations. So I'm going to go back to the 2020 Population Reference Bureau data sheet. I'm going to download it, and let's look at the economic status of some of these countries. And this is going to be a little bit scattered because of the nature of the region. Okay, so let's get to this region of the world, which is partially in what we would call Asia or Western Asia. So in Western Asia, we have Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia from this chapter. So let's look at those three countries in terms of their gross national income per capita, PPP. So Armenia, $13,190 per year. Azerbaijan, about 13,000 or so. Georgia, 13,000. Here now, Central Asia, here are the Central Asian countries, 22,000 for Kazakhstan. Kyrgyzstan is only $5,000 per person. Tajikistan is $3,890 per person. Uzbekistan, but you get the you get the idea here that these countries, which were part of the Soviet Union. So here, the Eastern Europe. Here's Belarus. Belarus is at $18,000 per person. Moldova, $13,000 per person. Even Russia is only $27,000 per person, less than half of the wealth of the United States of America. So this might come as a surprise if you understand the history. Maybe you don't remember. Obviously, you probably don't. But at one time, the United States and the Soviet Union were the world's two superpowers. Historically, these two superpowers were on the same side during the Second World War. After the Second World War, the United States and Russia and the Soviet Union, were on the same side, but there was a rivalry. And really, the Second World War presented a convenient opportunity for the Soviet Union because remember, one of the great enemies of the Soviet Union was Japan. And so it turned out that Japan was on the opposite side fighting the United States. So there's a saying that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So it was just convenient for the Soviet Union to side with the United States as they both had this common enemy in Japan. But that didn't mean that the United States and the Soviet Union were friends. They just had a common enemy. So after the Second World War, the United States and the Soviet Union got competitive in terms of technology, competitive in terms of influence, and so on and so forth. But the big problem was that the United States and the Soviet Union had different visions in terms of governance. The United States had the democratic model. The Soviet Union had a communist model, right? In terms of economics, the United States, we had a capitalist model of economics. The Soviet Union had a socialist model. So those two ideals really didn't work well together. And so the two nations went in separate directions and started to become competitive in what was called the Cold War, right? What was called the Cold War. I'm going to talk more about the political issues that happened in the Cold War last week, but in terms of how it affected these nations economically, you can see that at the end of the day, the Soviet Union, although it was a superpower, was not a wealthy nation, or was not a wealthy nation at all, as is reflected in the numbers that we see here. So going back to the environmental problems, clean air and clean water is expensive. We have relatively clean air, relatively clean water here in the United States. That costs money. And so because the Soviet Union didn't have a lot of money, they didn't have the resources to clean up their water or clean up their land or clean up their air. And as a result, you have these very, very heavily polluted areas. Now, it's also not that these people like living in a nasty, dirty, polluted environment. Nobody does. But again, it costs money to inspect facilities. It costs money. I mean, so if they're You could have all the laws in the books in the world as far as protecting the environment. And certainly the Soviet Union and these countries did or do. But if there's no enforcement, if there's not enough money to pay people to do inspections at facilities and plants, then those facilities are going to operate and pollute if there's nobody there to stop them from polluting or keep an eye on them. Because if they don't pay for pollution control devices, the industries make more money. If if an industry has to pay for air pollution technology and water pollution technology and whatever else technology to prevent pollution, it's going to cut into their profits. And if there's no oversight or no kind of enforcement to require those businesses to pay for all that clean air and clean water technology, they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. And as a result, you get heavily polluted water, rivers, land, and also acid rain. Acid rain is connected directly to air pollution. And so don't think of acid rain as being rain that has a pH of 1 or 2 and it's raining and it's burning you like, I'm acid, that's not what's happening with acid rain. Acid rain might have a pH of 5, which is a very weak acid. But if there's a lake or a river that has fish in it that have a pH tolerance range for the water that they live in, that's between, say, 6.2 and 6.8 pH, and that body of water receives pH 5 rain over a period of time, eventually the pH of that water might slip below 6.2. And when that happens, when you get acid precipitation that lowers the pH of a body of water below the tolerance level for the aquatic life, they all die. Now, just think, it's almost as if you cut off oxygen for human beings. It's the same thing. So you can see the result of some of these places that are impacted by acid rain, and you can just see it's just destructive. Just every fish in the lake or pond is dead. So that's the devastating impact of acid rain. And so if you can imagine that if there are people who depend upon those bodies of water as a food source, if people usually eat those fish and now all the fish are dead, then you can see how that could have a negative impact upon people's health. And so acid rain is not, like I said, not necessarily a direct danger to human health in terms of it being so acidic that it burns your skin and eyes. But it can kill fish. It can kill plants. It can destroy crops. It can and and so what happens with acid rain is when human beings release, say, sulfur dioxide into the air through industrial processes, that sulfur dioxide combines in the atmosphere with water, which is H2O. And as a result, you have H2SO4, which is sulfuric acid. Or you can have carbonic acid. Water combined with carbon dioxide can create carbonic acid, and so on and so forth. And those acids are constituents of acid rain. And of course, without air quality control in place, then you can see how you have a lot of acid rain and air pollution throughout the region. The former Soviet Union also has a lot of radioactive waste dump sites around. And so radioactive waste is dangerous for 10,000 years after it is, created. And so radioactive waste is a very nasty problem. We're going to talk about that uh, later on. So some of the environmental problems that exist in the former Soviet Union exist due to the fact that this region is relatively low income on the world stage, relatively low income. Um, what's complicating matters is this region is developing its oil and gas resources. And so if you notice on this map, figure 4.5, uh, a lot of these oil and gas facility, a lot of this oil and gas infrastructure is relatively new. So remember, this region was communist. There was not um, an effort to develop commercial or export oil and gas resources until recently, until after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. So since then, there's been this scramble to produce oil and gas, right? Now, of course, we know that the oil and gas industry is not a clean industry. We had a large oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. And so oil pollution is another big problem, but it's hard to balance the need or want to become or to gain wealth from the oil and gas industry and try to balance that against keeping the environment clean. And so it's a dilemma. Yes, we want to have a clean environment, but we want to make money from oil and gas. Sometimes you can't have everything that you want. And so that is what's happening in this case, where we see this region of the world trying to develop its oil and gas uh, industries and become more wealthy or gain wealth and be better able to take care of their populations and maybe in terms of material wealth and healthcare, who knows? Whatever it is that you can buy with money, they want more of it. But at the same time, they might not be able to enjoy that money and wealth because they're killing themselves with pollution. So it's a delicate balance that's happening here. And unfortunately, there's no way to expect that these countries are going to back off of developing oil and gas uh, businesses anytime soon. This is not expected to see any of these countries have any plans or expectation to back off of oil and gas production for sake of the environment. And we see that the battles happening here in this country with the planned pipelines being blocked and, because of fear of pollution, and then people on the other side claiming that, well, we need to have this oil and gas in order for our economy to function, and so on and so forth. So the dilemma over whether or not to continue to exploit fossil fuels is one that is global. And so this region of the world is no stranger to the struggle over whether or not to develop oil and gas. Uh, Now, another big issue from the environmental history of this region is the Chernobyl nuclear plant explosion that occurred in 1986. And so in Chernobyl, which is now in Ukraine, there was a nuclear facility that exploded and released toxic gases throughout the region. And it says here that about 1.5 million people were affected, 10% were severely radiated, 600,000 members of the cleanup team. Think about that, 600,000 people were involved in cleaning up this disaster. And the estimate is that about 9,000 people died from cancer due to the immediate exposure. There is an estimation that the total death toll will be about 100,000 as people die of the effects of radiation over time. So clearly, this was quite a substantial, um, quite a substantial disaster. And so you might ask, well, is this because nuclear energy or nuclear power is inherently dangerous? Well, of course it is. But the inherent danger related to nuclear power is not what was the root cause of this disaster. Again, if we want to look at the root cause of this disaster, we can look at the economic status of this region during the 1980s. As you can imagine, a nuclear facility is expensive to maintain. And unfortunately, the Soviet Union, being a relatively poor region, did not have the resources to properly sustain a nuclear facility. The facility fell into disrepair, and then there was an accident. And so, however, regardless of what happened, this disaster in 1986 scared the daylights out of everybody in the world. And it really put the brakes on nuclear power as being an alternative to fossil fuel worldwide. So the Chernobyl nuclear disaster was quite significant in terms of its extent and its lingering effects upon nuclear energy development throughout the region. And so there's read a background on the Chernobyl disaster within your reading assignment, and also some of the long-term plans to mitigate the site. And so you can see that there's a long history of environmental problems throughout this region. So let's go back to the reading assignment, and I think that we have we have the Aral Sea disaster there, oil production in Azerbaijan as a case study, acid rain, water pollution. So we've pretty much covered the physical geography and environmental problems in Russia and neighboring countries. And so as it relates to your current assignments, they're you know, you should just be aware of some of the information that's been covered in the last couple of days, especially with regard to writing assignment 5B. So I guess today's lecture is pretty much compact. I will have Monday's recording and today's recording up on the website as soon as possible. Again, I pledge to have everything graded by the end of the day on April the 19th. That includes your quizzes and article reviews. So I'm pledging to do that so that you will have a clear picture of where you stand prior to the final exam. If you're still, for whatever reason, not sure of what your midterm grade is, just let me know. And so, but in any case, if you had whatever grade you had at midterm and you've been working, turning in assignments, completing the quizzes, you should be okay. You should, as long as you maintain that same effort, you should be okay. Do a good job on the final exam project, and you should be on your way to the grade that you want in this class. Other than that, are there any questions about anything at this time? Okay, a little bit of a shorter class today. I will get this recording up as soon as possible. Thank you for joining us today, and I will see you all next Monday. It's almost over. It's almost over.